Israel was a mistake, and it
Yeah.
was a mistake for the Jews, and they did not calculate when they made this mistake what the result would be. Because when Zionism arose in the late 19th century, it was still just fine to go colonize the lands of non-Europeans. And the restraint against that was existing non-European populations that were too dense. So consequently, in the British Empire, when they colonized India, they never thought for a single day that they would replace the Indian population with British people. There was never, that thought didn't occur to them. It was only for exploitation, not for settlement. And when the Europeans went out in the 16th century, circling the world with their new superior ships, they prospected the world for Aboriginal places, regions inhabited by Aborigines with suitable climate that Europeans could come to inhabit. And they could easily wipe out the Aborigines. And that led to the foundation of the 6 successful settler states: Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, Argentina, and Uruguay. These are European settler states whose populations are overwhelmingly European that were founded successfully. There were also a lot of failed settler states, principally in Africa, such as the Italians in Libya, the French in Algeria, etc. And so when the Zionists came along, their project was, first of all, too late, because it started at the end of the 19th century, when all of the non-Europeans were already stirring with their own nationalism that they'd learned from the Europeans back to push back against the Europeans. And secondly, because Palestine was a densely inhabited, if very arid and poor country that had a unified population. It did not consist of competing tribes. It consisted of an entirely Arabic-speaking population. And yet the early Zionists just thought, oh, we'll just easily displace these people. So even Theodor Herzl wrote in his book that, well, the native inhabitants can be used to do things for us, like remove the poisonous snakes from the country before they are moved out or something,
Right.
as if getting rid of poisonous snakes was more important than moving these people out of their homes and taking over their area. And so it was a quixotic quest, and it barely gelled. It barely took place. And because it barely took place, it was quite a struggle. So they painted this for themselves in the nationalist terms as a great heroic struggle. It was such a wonderful miracle and all of these kind of things. And they were able to sell that to the Jews of the world, partly because of the Holocaust and partly because of the prevalence of anti-Semitism. Yet anti-Semitism itself was what the Zionist project had adopted, because it adopted the anti-Semitic idea that the Jews were a foreign body in the places where they lived, and they could not therefore abide there and had to all come and live in their own nation state and not live as a minority, not live as a minority in other places. And they also adopted the anti-Semitic tropes that diaspora Judaism was a bad thing, that the Jews, by being religious and relying on God throughout history, that was a mistake. They should rely on themselves instead. That the Jews, just as anti-Semitism tended to feminize them in the sense of making them, weak and the oppressed people, that they should adopt the opposite of that and should adopt a muscular, masculinist nationalism, which is what it became. And so the problem with Zionism is not that it's Jewish, it's that it's not Jewish. It has no Jewish characteristics except for window dressing. And it is essentially like that. And then, of course, they adopted, in adopting anti-Semitism, they allied with anti-Semites who were trying to get rid of the Jews from their own countries. So, for example, in Poland, interwar Poland, from 1918 to 1939, they Jews were 11% of the population, and most of them were exterminated in the Holocaust. And but during the interwar period, the Polish government was interested in Zionism because it was interested in, oh, well, this is the way to solve our Jewish problem. We'll just move all the Jews out of the country and they can go form another country, and that's fine with us. And so there was a kind of a overlap here between these two things. And so my objection to Zionism is that it's a nationalism, and I object to nationalism. So that's the crux of the matter, actually.
Hey there. I hope you're enjoying this episode. Let me just take a moment to introduce our sponsors for today. This episode is kindly being sponsored by the Worldwide Listings Company Limited, or WLC for short. WLC is a complete A to Z Amazon account management service. So if you're looking to start an e-commerce business, or you already have a business that you want to take to the next level, then get in touch and WLC will be able to help. Just for transparency purposes, let me also mention that WLC is a company that I personally created and am a director of. So when you get in touch with WLC, you will be speaking with directly myself or my team, and we very much look forward to speaking with you to see how we can serve your needs. Thank you. And with that said, let's get back to the episode. It's really interesting to see it in the context that you mentioned, especially in the context of the settler projects in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Uruguay, all of those places. I haven't thought about it that way before. And
those were much older projects. They worked because there were Aboriginal populations. In the United States, for example, they set the tribes against each other because these tribes were mutually hostile originally. And so they were able to say, okay, you attack those, like the Pequot massacre in 1637. They brought a whole bunch of maybe Wampanoag Indians to attack the Pequots with them. I mean, they used the Native Americans against each other. And the population was also very thin, and it was decimated by plagues that the Europeans brought with them by accident, just because they had these new diseases that the natives had no immunity to, so they died. And all of that didn't apply, though, in Palestine.
Also, I think it is true that, so the Jews in Israel, at least historically and traditionally, are secular Jews. So they say that the God we don't believe in promised us this land. Whereas I think now there is a movement of ultra-religious Jewish kind of population in Israel. So there is that kind of, there was a danger of a civil war within Israel before all of this even started.
Well, they're trying to square the circle because in order to fit the square peg of Judaism into the round hole of Zionism, they want to then take up the religious aspect. And so just as religion has come back for many people in many places in the world in various ways, but it's also often wedded to a local nationalism. And the question is, which is paramount? And if the nationalism is paramount, which it must be, because the state eats the religion and the religion does not eat the state, then that is their religion. It's a religion of statism before it is a religion of religious practice and spirituality. Nonetheless, one cannot dismiss that there are people who are really also religious in a conventional way. So this union of religion and nationalism is a very difficult thing. For example, there was Rabbi Menachem Froman from the West Bank settlement of Tekoa, southeast of Jerusalem, whom I met when he came to Temple University. And he was an amazing person. And I would have to say that he was a actual religious person and more on the religious side, because of course he met not only with Yasser Arafat, but met with Ahmed Yassin, the spiritual leader of the Gazans, who later was assassinated by Israel. And he met also with Khalid Amaira of El Khalil or Hebron. where he signed the Froman-Amira Accords, which they then presented to both the Israeli government and the Palestinian entity. And it was a peace plan. And Ahmed Yassin is said to have said, if all the Jews were like you, there'd be no problem. And the people said to Rabbi Froman, who was a West Bank settler and had been a member of the Gush Emunim, they said, well, you know, if Israel withdraws from the West Bank, there would be a Palestinian state. What are you going to do about that? And he said, well, I think a lot of my cohorts would leave, but I would hope that I would be permitted to stay here because I love this land. And so, okay, he'd stay under a Palestinian state. I mean, I don't really see a problem with that. And so I was, you know, deeply impressed by that. On the other hand, here you have, in this book here, The Empty Wagon, Zionism's Journey from Identity Crisis to Identity Theft by Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro, whom I have corresponded with, who is apparently part of the Satmar community that are anti-Zionist in New York City. And he has a total denunciation of Zionism in that book. He said, and he's a religious Jew living in New York, and he says, Zionism is kissing the idol. So he has exactly that kind of perception that I conveyed. And I responded to him and I said that in terms of Islam, we have people who are like that too, and we want to, you know, not enable them. And some of those statist movements, if they are going to substitute a state for Allah and set a state on the throne of Allah to be worshipped, then we do not want it. Just like the early Zionist, early Jewish settler in Palestine, Asher Ginsburg, who is known as Ahad Ha'am in Hebrew, one of the people. That was his nickname. He said in the 1890s about Zionism, and their statist desires, if this is the Messiah, I do not wish to see his